Alright, so I'm going to be refuting the claim that zero tolerance policy is a useful instrument in preventing drunk driving and violence in schools. So in the speaker's speech, they failed to define what the policy actually was. Although there isn't a set definition, the zero tolerance policy is a set of rules that ensure that any underage driver found with a blood alcohol concentration level over 0.00 will be found guilty of impaired driving and face serious penalties. It also directly relates to weapons in that any student caught with a weapon will immediately be suspended or expelled from school. So, in response to the speaker's first claim that the zero tolerance policy decreases the amount of drunken driving incidents worldwide, the speaker uses statistics to back this up. One of the statistics that they use is that drunk driving fatalities nationwide have decreased 49% since the policy took effect. One thing that is actually wrong with this claim is that it's very broad. It uses the term nationwide when actually not every state has adopted this policy. Only 15 states have it. There's also the idea that these decreases could be an effect of other things, such as, how many of you have heard of the every 15 minutes thing? Yeah, they came to my school, they just raised awareness on this topic. So maybe this decrease in fatalities is a source of other things such as these programs. Another thing the speaker fails to bring up is the negative effect that this policy actually has. An article in the Monument Country Tribune in 1998 tells a story of a boy who actually became suicidal after being expelled by his school for drinking off campus. So not only are the schools allowed to control what the kid does on campus under this policy, but what the kid does off campus. So moving on to the second claim, that the zero tolerance policy helps decrease teen drinking, knowing the punishment is steep for driving under the influence. So the wording of this claim is a little off. I personally have not met one person that has chosen not to drink because of this policy, and that is what the claim is saying. I could see how I meet people who maybe don't drink and drive because of this policy, but not that just don't drink in general. To support this claim, the speaker uses evidence that since the zero tolerance policy started, driving under the influence fatalities have decreased by 37%. This claim does not support the speaker's main claim, since the zero tolerance policy only affects those underage, while this statistics includes drivers of all ages. And then there's the speaker's third claim that states that the zero tolerance policy creates structure in the educational system. I found some statistics that show that almost all experts, including those from CASA and ABA, agree that the zero tolerance policy has more risks than benefits. There's actually a story in the St. Petersburg Times in 2001 that reported a 10-year-old girl that found a small knife in her lunchbox, put there by her mom to cut an apple. The child immediately gave the knife to the teacher, but was still expelled from her elementary school for possessing a weapon. There was a study taken every year from 1993 to 2004 in regards to this policy. It showed the percentage of students in grades 9 to 12 who reported having been in a physical fight during the previous 10 months. The results showed that over the 11 years, the survey's results stayed around 20%. This shows neither growth or decline in the decrease of violence in schools. This goes against the speaker's evidence that violence has decreased as a result of this policy. There is also no evidence that the zero tolerance policy has indeed increased the consistency of school policy, although rates of suspension and expulsion vary widely across schools. The variation is more likely due to the characteristics of the town that the school is in, not the policy. There's also an assumption that shows that schools with high rates of suspension because of this policy have less satisfactory climate. Therefore, the zero tolerance policy equals more suspensions among schools equals a worse climate. And that claim leads to the fact that school suspension predicts higher future rates of misbehavior and dropouts. Those expelled because of this policy are more likely to not get back into the educational system, therefore drop out of school altogether. So in conclusion, the speaker's evidence proves irrelevant to their claim targeting the underage drinkers. And in the third secondary claim, there are no studies that show evidence that the zero tolerance policy improves school performance.
Right, I like the idea at the beginning of challenging the criteria for what zero tolerance policies really mean, and I think that that's an important consideration since that's the whole basis of the advocate's argument. But then basically what you do is define it for them, and I'm not sure that that helps very much. The signpost on the individual points as you got to them were clear, so that's easy. I liked your analysis arguing about the impact of nationwide decreases. And then you have one piece of information that you present. It says only 15 states have adopted these zero tolerance policies for kids in this age range. And I thought, okay, that's a good piece of information if it's a nationwide trend that we're looking at, but only 15 of the states have implemented it, then maybe it's hard to attribute it to that. You ought to be citing that data. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how you got that information, and that sounds pretty important. It might even have been out of the advocate's own argument, but I don't know. There's also an explanation about alternatives that could be accounting for that. That's okay. You mentioned, for instance, the every 15-minute program, and maybe there are better education programs on these kinds of things. I thought that was reasonable, but you don't have any evidence to follow up on it yourself, so it basically comes off as a reasonable press, but that's about it. The notion that there are negative consequences because of these policies, and your only example is, well, some kid was suicidal because he got expelled for drinking off campus. I'm not sure that that really does much to promote the position that there is a big danger on this particular issue, and I think you'd be subject to some of the same presses that you were using against the advocate on this argument. On your second point, there's a lot of stuff that sounds like it's a repeat on this point, especially at the beginning. I did like the data challenge that you had that suggested that this was across all age groups, and the advocate's argument is supposed to be focusing on a particular age group, so I thought that that was a reasonable challenge. The mention that there are a whole bunch of organizations that see problems with the zero tolerance policies, I think you need to explain a little bit more what those organizations are and what the problems are that they see with this so that we can be able to judge it. The next thing I know that you're talking about the violence risk, and I thought that you had a good example about how zero tolerance sometimes is out of proportion. To me, the clearest argument on this point was the one that suggested that the levels of violence have remained relatively stable, regardless of whether or not there was a zero tolerance policy from 10 years ago up to today. So it's unlikely that it's actually had any impact. The one thing that I think you need to do is give us a source citation on that information, and then also contrast it to the evidence that the advocate used. All right, thank you. Lewis.